So, introducing the panel, starting on this side closest to me, we have Simon Darby from Westminster Advisors, and we've been speaking to him as part of REBA about what we should do about lobbying. Next to him is Stephen Gambles, who many of you will know is Head of Performance and Reward at Royal London, so he's our practitioner reward person on the panel. Next to him is Shawn Healy, again somebody that many of you will recognise, a principal at BDO, so our tax expert on the panel. And then at the far end is Jamie Jenkins, who's Head of Pensions Strategy at Standard Life. Now, he's our pensions expert. Unfortunately, he's also got to duck off in about 17 minutes, don't you? So which is why I wanted him to sit on the end, so he could slip away, hopefully remembering to leave his lapel mic behind before he goes off. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to start with the pensions question. I was going to build up more broadly and then get onto pensions, but I don't want to miss out the opportunity for Jamie just to give his insight about, and the rest of the panel, about what they think might happen on the 16th of March. Lots of rumours out there, lots of thoughts about what could happen with pensions and taxations. So Jamie, you give your insight before I ask the rest of the panel for their views.
Small question then. What will happen on the 16th of March? Am I turned on? Of course I'm turned on, yeah. Talking about pensions. I don't think anyone knows clearly what's going to happen in the theatre that is the budget statement on the 16th of March. We'll all see, and our Chancellor is known for surprises, of course, so I think they will keep that, I'm sure, very tight in terms of who knows what before the budget, just like they did very successfully, one would argue, with the pension freedoms. However, I suppose the question is, well, what would we like to see? What might we see? I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric now in terms of pensions around seeing a flat rate of tax relief replacing the current regime. And actually, more accurately, a flat rate would be an incentive rather than relief, because it wouldn't be relief of income tax. It would be an incentive which could be moved up or down, or indeed set at the outset at any rate that the Chancellor decides. So, and we think there's a strong rationale for that. We expect that the main thing is that auto-enrolment can continue, and we can still say that it is right for everyone to be in a pension basic rate or indeed higher rate. I know some of you will have some doubts about that. It does depend where the flat rate is set, but we think it's still a good thing for most people to be in a pension, so it shouldn't, in theory, disrupt auto-enrolment. The Chancellor's other big option, if you like, is to move to what they call a TEE model, so a taxed and then exempt from tax during saving and exempt at retirement, or the ISA-style model, and we think that's, we're concerned about that in terms of what impact it might have on automatic enrolment. We think it might undermine the principle that a pension is right for everybody. Personally, I don't think they will go to that level, but I know that it's still on the table. In fact, I would say, to conclude, in answer to your question, I think everything is still on the table, from minimal change with further continuous tinkering, unlikely but possible. Flat rate, I think, is the front runner, and then I think moving to an ISA-style model is less likely but still on the table and still something that they are considering. And within all that, any change away from the current tax relief model as it stands probably means that you lose salary sacrifice at some point, because leaving salary sacrifice on pensions allows you effectively to work around any new model of incentives or TEE, and so that just couldn't coexist.
Okay, thank you. So maybe get our tax expert, Shawn. What's your view on what might happen?
How long have you got? I think it's important to understand that what tends to happen now is, going back to days of Home Computer Initiative when the cycle scheme started, the revenue were engaging directly with ministers. The practice tends to be now that they engage with the Treasury, and the Treasury then engage with ministers. So you've got a very different formulaic approach. Will it go completely? I look at salary sacrifice as a mechanism, and what we all focus on is actually not salary sacrifice, it's the outcomes of that. Do we have a tax-free benefit? Do we have a taxable benefit? So it would be very easy, for example, to withdraw national insurance relief on pension contributions. which is what the gain is through going through salary sacrifice. There's no tax advantage with pensions. So very broadly, we've got tax advantage benefits and non-tax advantage benefits. The tax advantage ones, the revenue keep monitoring constantly. We saw the change last year on what we call travel and subsistence schemes. If you're in an industry that knows that, you'll know about it. Most industries, it's not actually usable. So they've closed the door on that because they perceived that there was an unfair advantage. But this has to be looked at in a wider context, because this is happening across the employment tax piece, where they're looking at different ways, different tax advantages that are arising. But one question I'd give you is, the biggest benefit we all know is usually PMI. It's taxable, so there's no tax loss. The Exchequer, there's no employer's national insurance loss, but there is an employee's national insurance loss. So if you're looking to save money, you could easily change that with one line of legislation. But will that happen? I don't know. I think we've got a question later on about the merger of PAY and NICs, and that might be subsumed into that broader piece.
Stephen, tough question. Speaking on behalf of the 160 reward and benefit practitioners in this room, but what your view, as a practitioner, when you hear all this, how do you react to it?
Let me put it in 3 buckets, actually. Okay. So the first one is, there will be people here who are far more capable than I am when it comes to taxation, but I do think that as an employer, that this is incredibly disconcerting for employees. Whether it is certainly losing national insurance breaks on pension schemes, employers treat those in different ways. So my current employer, Royal London, we actually just pay it into the pension scheme. So it's a boost to contributions. So obviously it's written in that if that disappears, then so does that contribution. So there's an immediate cut to benefits for our employees. Other employers may be doing a split. So there might be some going in and some staying out, and they're using that to fund other benefits for employees. So whether they're core or voluntary, or whether they're using it to pay some of the suppliers who are here today. We play the game with the finance department, and that's how we tend to create a budget for benefits. So there's employee confusion, employee detriment, and then I think the third bucket is my concern is just how much we're going to be able to do for our employees going forward, and I suspect that, like I think when we first met, actually, Simon, we talked about some of this stuff, which is the fact that as an employer we become a proxy administrator for the government, and actually you've sort of been able to justify some of that because there's been this give and take on some of this stuff. And I think as an employer, and this is not necessarily, this is me as an employer, not Royal London as an employer, but it might make you think, do you know what, I'm a little bit annoyed now about having to do some of these things that the government's asking me to do, because they're constantly coming back for more and more money.
If I may just add to that, I attended one of the revenue meetings called A Call for Evidence about salary sacrifice and flexible benefits. And I was thinking on the way here how hopefully to succinctly explain that. Those of us that are football fans in the room remember about 25, perhaps 30 years ago, we exported football to the States. And if you can imagine sitting in front of an audience of American sports people explaining football 25 to 30 years ago, that's the tenor of the level of understanding that the revenue have about flexible benefits and salary sacrifice generally. I'm trying to make light of it, but it also concerns me that their perception is, to be fair, and to the people there, it was a genuine request for evidence. It wasn't a clever way of trying to find out stuff. Most of the people in the room were employees. Maybe some people here have attended similar meetings, but the thrust of the response they got was flexible benefits, the use of salary sacrifice is just part of business now. It's nothing special, it just exists, it's there. We do it because everybody else does it, that kind of thing. If we make any savings, as has already been said, that's money just used up elsewhere in paying for benefits, employee communication, so on and so forth. And there was a lot of noddy dog going on from the revenue side of the piece. But from the wider role I have, I know what's behind this. This is somebody somewhere in Treasury said, see if there's any black holes there that we can close. Is there any perception of any tax loss? So everybody in this room has a role to play in helping educate any contacts you have with HMRC that a flexible benefit arrangement or single standalone salary sacrifice arrangement is not about avoiding tax and national insurance.
Okay, I suppose
I think that's a good point. If I can bring Simon in, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Simon, you
just
can
to,
give a broader view of how this
yeah,
works.
Thanks. Just to pick up on that point, obviously, there is clearly a lack of understanding from a Treasury perspective on salary sacrifice in particular, and that in part is due to the nature of tax forgone, tax lost, and kind of the lack of reporting that goes on in that area. So because they don't necessarily know how much is being lost, it automatically creates concern for them with the possibility that vast sums of money that could be coming into the Exchequer aren't. And I'd agree in terms of conversations I've had with the Treasury that level of understanding is certainly quite accurate. In terms of wider government perspectives of salary sacrifice, I think you do have to start with the salary sacrifice review and the concerns from a financial perspective that there are. And this isn't something new. If you go back to the Office of Tax Simplification's work throughout the coalition, starting off with a very extensive review of tax reliefs and then looking in further years at kind of the administrative nature of individual schemes and how they impact businesses. There's been a long trend towards this sort of scrutiny and rigour. So this isn't coming out of the blue. Partly given the bind that Treasury finds itself in terms of finding ways to potentially raise revenue, given that they're committed to not increasing income tax, national insurance contributions, VAT. Any other ways around that will be given credence, and obviously clearly people have been tasked with looking at this in quite minute detail. That's not to say that that's the view across government as a whole. Indeed, salary sacrifice has been used very constructively by government to further specific policy objectives and ambitions. And indeed, in part of my work, particularly in relation to the Cycle to Work scheme and with the childcare voucher scheme, obviously accepting the changes within that, that's been the core of what we've done, is to demonstrate how that is aligned with broader government objectives. What I would say is that employers, as Stephen has mentioned, obviously do a lot that benefits government by proxy, and they don't necessarily get the recognition that it deserves. And I think there's clearly a case for a stronger voice to make that argument.
Yes, Jamie, and I don't want to get questions going, so in case any pension questions in the audience.
Yeah. So just to add to that, and maybe a bit of clarity on something I said at the outset, I don't personally think there's a huge risk to the employer incentive, the National Insurance Saving on Employer Contributions. And the reason I say that, it is a big prize for Treasury. It's probably somewhere in the sort of 10 to 15 billion per annum mark. I mean, it's a huge amount of money, and various people have quoted it as an obvious target. The fundamental problem with that, of course, is that if you reduce the incentive to pay pension rather than salary, then how many employers will actually pay a generous pension benefit at all? Why wouldn't you just level down to the minimum under auto-enrolment and offer people salary? And most employees, rightly or wrongly, will thank you for that flexibility, as we've seen. So what I do think will be, and it's hard to police, I get this, what I do think is under serious threat is the ability for an employee to sacrifice salary to make it an employer contribution. And that's a key point. Can I just take a quick straw poll? Not using the, just use hands. So how many people would at least review the level of employer contributions, or expect your employer to review the level of employer contributions if there were no incentive to pay pension over salary? Put your hand up. Yeah, 64.9%. We'll tweet that. It's a good influencing technique.
So would anybody like to pick up on that pension question? Is there something we've not answered on the pension side that you want to get Jamie while he's still here? I've got Anne down the front here. Where's the microphone? Oh, there. Thanks. It's coming down.
Hi, it's Anne Taggart from MISIS. With the restrictions to the annual allowance coming in, what does the panel feel that employers could do or should do with regards to pensions, particularly perhaps not being as attractive anymore, especially for your high earners who generally could be the key decision makers when it comes to pensions?
I'll very briefly, offer up from what I've heard from employers, I guess, and employers know better how to handle this than somebody like me, I guess. At the extreme end, what we've seen is employers, in some cases, just saying, look, the maximum we'll pay is £10,000, because if we can't be sure how much you're earning or how much you will earn, and we don't want to fall foul of that, and we can't be bothered with the administration of trying to track everybody's earnings inside and outside of work. And I fully understand that. I mean, the complexity it's introducing is extraordinary. The one other comment, I mean, there are all sorts of things I know that employers are doing, and some of my colleagues might comment on it. One other thing to say, though, somebody said the other day, the amount of work that this particular person has put in a big organisation in the UK to try and educate all the higher earners or possible higher earners on this problem and put in place some infrastructure to deal with it, some processes to deal with it, has been extraordinary. And the thing that would annoy this person most would be a last-minute U-turn in the budget now that they've spent all that time. And that, again, it is a possibility. I think it's unlikely, but it's a possibility.
I might ask you a question, actually, rather than provide a response at the moment. But in terms of, you get the... it feels like with the higher earners, we're trying to hit them with two sticks at the moment. And I just wondered, actually, if that was something that, in your capacity, you were hearing some complaints around. And because actually, if you cap tax relief and also cap the amount of money that's gone in, so I seem to remember 255,000 being the limit not so long ago, and it's obviously come down dramatically, and then capping it, it does seem two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to some extent that plays into the wider political agenda and other people's comments. Of course, I wouldn't comment, but at the idea that the Conservative Party are moving to the centre ground, and a part of that is re-engaging with Britain's public, not just its high earners, and I guess that fits with that agenda, if you believe that to be true. Yes, it is. I mean, I think the fact is that in an austere period of society, the people who earn the most are going to take the biggest hit, and that's where we are. And that's not a political statement, to be clear, but I think that's where we are and what we're seeing.
Can I add a comment to that? I do see this a lot, because obviously the higher earners can generate a lot of angst within an organisation. I want this done, sort it yesterday. And what worries me the most is people are looking for a one-size-fits-all solution, and whilst they may be high earners, their positions are very, very different often. So the solution to me, and nobody wants to pay for it, is individual financial and taxation advice around their position. So that's the watchword I'd give you as employers, is that's the road you should be going down. But if you do, be careful, because if you provide that financial and pensions advice, you're creating another taxable benefit. So do tread with care.
Just, very briefly as well, I saw a comment the other day that somebody used the expression earlier on that it's not a homogenous group, and you can say that about high earners as well. Some people just say, well, we've got, I think, something like 5 million higher rate taxpayers, and somebody made the assumption that they're all high earners, and the fact that you then multiply up if they could all pay in £10,000 a year and take advantage of an intervening period between now and tax rates changing, and then came up with a sum. And the assumption that every higher rate taxpayer is by definition a high earner is hugely flawed, as everybody in this room knows. And there's a lot of higher rate taxpayers who are not wealthy people. Indeed, he or she supporting a family and a partner and 2 children on a salary of 45,000 is not a high earner by any definition. And it's quite an important point. So to then extrapolate that all higher rate taxpayers can easily bung in £10,000 for their pension is wildly erroneous. So there's quite a lot of stuff that I think people are saying which is misleading.
I mean, just pick up on that point actually around people who will breach this limit are all in the same boat, and actually they aren't, and that's kind of why the lifetime allowance is probably a better fit, because you're going to have some people who go into this who don't have the pension savings that maybe they should have because they've been paying a mortgage off. We talked about this a little bit beforehand, or we're indebted or whatever. But so actually, I think from an employer's reaction to it, I think there is an advice bit, but I think the other bit is flexibility, because actually it's going to be right for some people to continue to contribute to their pension because they haven't contributed enough to date, and to take the tax hit of contributing to the pension, whereas for others, I think they're probably right to take the cash.
And I do employment tax all day, but I'll tell you now, every time we get a question of this nature, this is not something we just trot out. It's very, very complicated, and there have been some massive foul-ups because of the complexity of legislation. A quick example, if anybody's knows somebody in their family who's a member of police that's retired in the last couple of years, they will know about this. A lot of police officers have retired and gone back in civilian capacities and found, because of a lacuna in the law, they're owing tens of thousands of pounds in tax because they've been re-engaged by the same employer. So there's lots, and that can apply to people outside of public service. So if your people are leaving, they're coming back, it's another thing you've got to be or somebody has to be very careful of. And if they're senior, it won't be their problem, it'll be their employers.
Can I take another question from the audience? Yes, Charles, down the front.
Charles Cotton, CIPD. I just wondered whether the panel thinks that the government's aim is to move the welfare state to the workplace.
Who wants to take that one first?
Shall I kick off on that one? That's quite a big question, isn't it? Possibly. I think certainly one of the striking things since the election and, through the Conservative majority government is, it's probably taken people by surprise, is a readiness to place burdens on business. And obviously I'm thinking kind of like grand things like the national living wage or indeed the apprenticeship levy. So looking to use business as a route to achieve policy ambitions. And I do see that continuing. I think that's kind of a new settlement that Osborne wants to deliver. Now, you can argue whether that's right or wrong, but I think there is certainly indications that government is looking to push the burden for a whole range of issues onto employers.
I'll comment from a slightly different perspective, I suppose, ignoring the sort of, the wider political agenda, which may or may not be the case. I'm not sure there's a plan that's that long term, to be honest. What I will say is that if you look at the context of a workplace for getting certain things done, you can see that auto-enrolment sits very comfortably as a nudge in the workplace. Somebody starts earning with an employer, they start paying into their pension. In the same way as they get paid for future, which is their retirement income. Some people then, so as you can see, if you take the big nudge experiment, which so far so good, of auto-enrolment, 6 million people in and less than 10% opting out, that's all grand. Some people then say, well, should we just piggyback that with, there's life assurance. People should have protection in place. And that's broadly true. There's probably 2.5 or 3 trillion pounds under insured people in the UK who, if they die, their dependents have serious problems, and that's true. So you could say, well, we've done this on pensions, why not do that? But the nudge in the workplace there isn't quite so obvious, because the natural point to take out life assurance isn't necessarily when you start work. It could be, but actually you might say it's when you get married or you have your first child, or actually those are more natural nudge points. And I think, so if I take the question from that perspective, I think there's probably something to say about auto-enrolment sits comfortably in the workplace, and anything that surrounds, a new income to somebody earning in a family, that sits quite well for nudges of that nature. But actually there's other life events that I think we could build it around, which sit more comfortably in a welfare state than an employment context. And I think that's the next interesting step on this journey.
Can I add a couple of quick points to that, Charles? I think from just an operational point of view, there are roughly 30 million employees in the UK. So if you think from a government or treasury perspective, pushing something via an employer is a very efficient and cheap way of informing, recovering revenue, doing anything that you want to do with that population. And that's a huge number, and it's only growing. It might change with the economic cycle, but it's only growing. And the second point is there's such a level of complete and utter apathy and misunderstanding of what people's pay, tax deductions are, etc., etc. So there's a little bit there, I think, where the government can safely say, well, we'll just tell employers they've got to do this, because the average employee won't understand or frankly care what's happening behind the scenes. So as to build on the nudge point, it's an easy route. So I can see them looking at that.
Can I bring in a different question? It's one that keeps coming back from time to time, and that's that idea of merging PAYE and national insurance contributions. Ever going to happen? Not going to happen? Shawn, do you want to give your opinion?
Are we going to win the World Cup? This has been kicking around for 10 or 15 years. The pay-as-you-earn system doesn't work. It worked when it was for everybody at the end of the Second World War had one job with one salary, and that was it. It's vastly complicated now. It is seriously being looked at by the OTS, but there is an awful lot of just basic primary legislation to deal with to get to any form of merger. That said, the biggest political football in there is there's still a perception by the voters in this country that they pay national insurance contributions to get their pensions, and it's going to take a very brave politician to break that contributory principle and say it's just tax. If I want to be provocative on a night out, I say to people, you're paying tax at 32%. Well, where'd you get that from? You know, there's a lot, for years and years, although there's a mathematical exercise that goes on within Treasury, employees' national insurance does not go effectively to a pension fund. Pensions are funded out of general government income. So,
I think that's true. I mean, pick up on your very first comment. I'm Scottish. We're never going to win the World Cup. Let's be perfectly honest. I'll put that on record. I mean, I think there's probably a strong, there's probably a strong rationale that says that thing of merging those two elements makes a lot of sense, but it's an awful lot of trouble for a very little gain. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, for a strict benefits point of view, if we're sitting here in X years' time and it's happened, well, straight away the cost of benefits have gone up because there will be no differential between a benefit delivered through Flex or through an employee's net salary, i.e. the employee's national insurance would be in there, not because they're attacking Flex, because that's the rules now. So, there's a...
Can I take another question from the floor? Okay, perhaps while you're thinking about it, Duncan, do you think you could put my question up on the screen? I'd like to get everybody to vote. And I was wondering, something we've been talking about is whether REBA should be... should we be doing something collectively about salary? I asked about salary sacrifice. It could be anything. Should we set up a lobby fee? It might cost us. We might have to ask you all to contribute. Should we perhaps collectively react to consultations, perhaps a bit more informally, where I pull something together? Or is this something that you already do as organisations and you've got policy people, especially the bigger organisations? Just want to get a test of the water, see how you feel. So, can we... How's the voting going there? Okay, that will give me something to think about and keep me busy for the next few months. So, definitely looks like a big vote for collectively reacting to a consultation. So I think there's a goer. And then we've got a number of people who are up for a lobby group. So who knows, you might be talking to Simon in the future on that one. Great, thank you very much. Can we go back to the normal slide? While we've done that, any other questions you'd like to throw at the panel while we've got... Yep, probably last question here, third row from the front, Susie, next to Ant.
Hi, Graham Mooney from United Utilities. A couple of members of the panel have mentioned about childcare vouchers being the type of arrangement that has actually been favourable from a political point of view, but obviously that was due to die and then was given a reprieve. But do you think there's any chance that will be, the tax-free childcare launch will end up never coming?
Simon?
Obviously, I have to declare an interest here because I do work for this Childcare Voucher Providers Association separately. Obviously, at the moment, from the government's perspective, the plan is that tax-free childcare will be introduced in the early part of 2017. Whether that's in a big bang or indeed a phased rollout with pilot schemes, I think there's a lot that still needs to be discussed within HMRC and Treasury on that. Equally, in terms of whether the grandfathering of the old schemes, so when new entrants to childcare vouchers will close, that relationship needs to be sorted. Because obviously for a lot of people, the current arrangements will be much better. The eligibility constraints on the new tax-free childcare scheme are much more limiting, shall we say, in terms of who can access that and the support it can give. But yeah, at the moment it's early 2017, and that's that's what HMRC and Treasury are sticking to.
Any other thoughts, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on childcare vouchers by any stretch, but I suppose in the wider context of what the Chancellor might do on salary sacrifice, again, qualify something I said earlier, I think the target is pensions. I think that's the big prize. I guess in that discussion, though, in that closed room with that flip chart that they all have as they're doing the budget preparation, they will look at the wider opportunity, and I just don't think it's as big a prize to go after stuff that's quite emotive but doesn't necessarily bring back a lot of money to Treasury. Pensions is, gross 50 billion, net 30, 35 billion. I mean, it's a huge number, and that to me will be the focus of attention. I'd be very surprised if they go for a kind of mass removal of salary sacrifice. I just don't think there's much to be gained from doing it beyond pensions.